And so we just kind of were summarizing and conceptualizing what we've talked about so far, and we're moving on to self-determination theory. Um, and this is a huge one. This one talks about the basic human needs that people need to be motivated, and it takes all three most of the time. And so largely, one of the large aspects is autonomy, and this is a student's agency. It's when they have voice and choice in what they're doing. And so, when you have autonomy, you've got input. And so you have to ask yourself, how am I giving my students input in the lesson? Do they have autonomy, or is it all of me? And and so it's that voice and choice, and lots of other things that make it that encourage self-control and self-direction. Now, mastery is a little counterintuitive. I want you to think about mastery as in the urge to get better because something matters, not the goal to be perfect and master something. It's very counterintuitive. But when you're talking about mastery, you are talking literally that someone wants to incrementally get better because they know it matters. And so this is helping students to monitor their progress over time. They are appropriately challenged with that scaffolding. They have an appropriate ZPD to help support them. You kind of want to minimize that social comparison here, even though it can be helpful in some cases. And then that feedback is essential, and encouraging intellectual risk-taking is a huge part of mastery. And then, relatedness. I'm all about this one. And so it's how you belong in a classroom. It's when someone walks in, do they feel like they fit, or do they feel like they got to get out of there, right? And so your relatedness matters in the classroom. It's your relationships with peer-to-peer and peer-to-teacher and class-to-teacher. It's all these things. You've got your cooperative groups that go into this. You've got mutual care and respect. So it's like you're building this beautiful classroom community as well. You are equitable. Students, I will give you examples on this. I think it comes up later. Students see when you are inequitable to some students versus others. So you have to maintain equity, and that also comes with a lot of things, but looking and addressing our implicit biases is crucial in that one. You are providing assistance and support to everyone. So if you were to do an equity survey in your classroom, I do wonder, what your students say. Do they see that even it doesn't really matter sometimes what we think. It's if the students think that you're supporting and helping other students more than them and it's unfair, then in their mind, it's unfair. And so you have to be really careful with this as well and how you're available to your students. Let's keep going here. However, there's a lot of diversity in these three things, so you can't just, define them and move on with life. And so for autonomy, there is diversity. So some students find teacher direction motivating, whereas other students need that self-direction. And some I know that some students do prefer that people are making choices for them. And I saw this in my students sometimes, especially when their self-efficacy was down. It was almost like they liked me as a bigger guide so that they felt more confident. And then, I'd wean off that. That's the goal. But some students do enjoy having less autonomy, need less autonomy, but the goal is to always kind of scaffold and then, find that balance and incrementally draw it back. Now, for mastery, students may tend to engage in self-handicapping. And so these students are not even going to try because they don't want to look like they don't want to fail, basically. And we'll talk about that in terms of growth mindset. But so these students really want to protect their self-worth, and you're going to see that these students don't want to, they don't have that urge to just get better. And then some students are going to be really focused on correcting their weaknesses. I just lost my notes. And so that's going to look different in certain students, where some are going to, master on, I'm really good at this, let's keep going. Some are going to be like, I can't do this, Miss P. I've had this, like, no, like, I don't even want to try. Like, ugh, I'm so bad at this task. So that's kind of where you'll fall into that. And then with relatedness, there are some cultural differences in terms of the emphasis on peer relationships and family ties. And so remembering that we live in a very individualized culture, some families don't connect with that. Some families see learning as a very like familial effort, literally, like the whole family is in tuned. They feel like you use peers to help, and you use each other to promote that learning. And so sometimes these families don't want as much autonomy for their students because they really do see achievement as a community effort. And so these are really important things, especially when you're communicating with parents, with diverse parents, and just seeing, what is your definition of learning, and just asking them, like, what does it mean to you for your child to achieve? So that could be a really good question for parents. And this is kind of the self-determination continuum. And I really just want you to look at the big domains here, like top, middle, and like bottom, and then the colors. And so, when you're thinking about motivation, it's this continuum from you have no motivation, amotivated, to fully self-determined. And you've got different types of regulatory styles, and that kind of talks about, do you need external rewards to motivate you, or are you're totally regulated on your own? What's the source of your motivation, and what regulates the motivation? And so this is a really cool diagram to look at when you're trying to internalize self-determination theory. It's really good. You can spend some time and pause and look at it and explore it a little bit. And just promoting motivation in terms of autonomy, mastery, and relatedness. You want to engage your students in valued activities, provide that warm and caring environment, of course, some autonomy, and you're just getting to know your learners and seeing when they need it, when they don't want it or need it, and your appropriate scaffolding. And so these are really easy to say, and they look pretty and nice, but it gets complicated in the classroom. And so for the most part, we really have to ask ourselves, and this goes into that testing concept I was talking about earlier, do we let students guide themselves, or are they these robots? And here's this cool graphic on that concept. And not that structured, and so we're talking about how much autonomy we're willing to give our kids. Not that structured inquiry means that you're treating your students like robots. It just means that they need a true guide at that moment. They either need one, or you're not being intuitive to their needs and you're giving them too much of a guide. And so structured inquiry has its place in the classroom. And then you go to controlled inquiry. So you can kind of see, like, this is more where you're kind of scaffolding, you're letting go a little bit. And so teacher chooses topics and identifies the resources that students will use to answer their questions. But largely, like, you're providing the bigger foundation for them. And then you've got guided inquiry, where teachers are there for support, and then students are designing their products or solutions. I kind of see that as like, well, the cell is even controlled inquiry, because the teacher had the topic and kind of gave them a lot of structure, which is, I think, is why it works so well. And then you've got things like free inquiry, where students choose their topics. Let's see here. Students choose their topics without reference to any prescribed outcome. And so this one looks really pretty and it sounds good, but it's very difficult to do. I would say, like, if we lived in a more like learning was less, if schools were less like a business in terms of academic testing, and we were actually letting kids learn and explore based on what they love, free inquiry would be what we'd want. But when you get into the classroom, you'll see it's not exactly a viable option, but striving for it would be great. And this can go into your inquiry as well. Your philosophy. What type of inquiry do you want your students to engage in, and how do you know when the best type is to implement? Okay, so the next task, I provided a website to create memes based on like self-determination theory, probably, or whatever we've learned. Honestly, you can use whatever content we've talked about so far. And if you can, go to the website and make a meme and drop it in the collaborate board. And if it's not working, don't stress. I understand. And so this is my meme, and I think it's funny. And so I want you to try to think critically. This is creativity, and drop a meme in the collaboration board. I'm so excited about this one. I laughed